I wanted to make the true bias lander pants and a pair of corduroy trousers for a couple of years now, and in today's video I'm combining both of these sewing plans into one, and I'm taking you through the whole process from altering the pattern to constructing the lander pants. Hi, my name is Matilda and welcome back to Miss Matti. In today's video we will make the true bias lander pants in this beautiful green corduroy fabric. I've had a pattern for over a year now, but it took me some time to find the perfect corduroy fabric to make the trousers out of. I do not know why it's so hard to find good quality corduroy fabric. I ordered the fabric in the end from Blackbird's Fabrics. As soon as I saw it in stock, I ordered it straight away. Not only because I had been looking for over a year, but also I find that many fabrics that I want from Blackbird's Fabrics always sell out so quickly, and this time I really didn't want to miss out. In a moment, I will show you the initial pattern alterations that I did before assembling mockup number 1. I made a waist in a size 6 and I made a hips in a size 12 because that was the closest size to my measurements. My hip to waist ratio is 12 inches and the lander pants pattern is made for 8 inches. Because I'm also very long-waisted, I also added in the extra length that you will need to have when you make your pants in size 12 here. The reason why I lengthened it here and not up at the waist is that otherwise the fly facing will not fit. I didn't cut out belt loops for the mock-up because I felt that it was not a step that I would need to focus on. My main goal for making a mock-up was to ensure that the pants fit me really well. Then I cut out the waist in a size 6 to match the waist measurement. The lander pants are made for someone who is 5 feet 5, and as I'm 5'9", I added in 4 extra inches or 10 centimeters here in the leg, and then I cut my pants to the full length. The lander pants also come in an ankle length and a short version. Now it's time to look at the back leg piece. Here I did the same as at the front piece. I made a waist in a size 6 and the hips in a size 12, lengthened the trousers both in the leg and the waist. If you look here at the back pockets, they are marked so that you cut a size 4 to 12 in one size, which is perfect as it works with both of the sizes that I have blended together. But I marked my pocket placement for a size 8 on the trousers as it's a little bit in between size 6 and 12. We will see if I like the placement or not once I make my mock-up. I plan to not stitch the pocket in place and pin and play around with the placement if needed once the mock-up is done. These are the front pocket pieces that I cut to a size 12. I must admit that I'm not sure if this was the right choice or not. I think I might have to do some kind of alterations to them later on. We will see. I am super excited to get going and assemble this mock-up. And once I'm done, I will try the mock-up on and see if we need to do any additional alterations. This is how my first mock-up turned out. As expected, I will need to make alterations to the front pockets, as the pocket opening is gaping and do not lay flat against the trousers. To judge how much I will need to remove, I pinned together the excess fabric at the opening. Then you can see here at the front crotch area that there are drag lines going upwards from the crotch and excess fabric. Off camera, I also tried to sit down wearing my mock-up and the front crotch dug into the pubic area. Yikes, not comfortable at all. You can also see that there are a bit too much excess fabric at the hips, and I think I will need to smoothen out the seam line between the hip and the waist. Then at the back, you will notice that I will need to do a full seat adjustment, as there are drag lines all pointing to the back crotch seam. You can also notice a slight tug at the back waistline, which is a common fit issue with rounder bums. Okay, now it's time to make the actual pattern alterations. I started by adjusting my front pocket piece by placing it on top of the pocket and marking where I pinned the excess fabric. I marked with a pencil on the mock-up where I pinned on the pocket, then removed the pins and measured the distance. Then I marked the same distance on the pattern and drew a diagonal line towards the other side of the pocket. I cut this line and then pivoted the pattern piece towards the second marking. This caused the side of the pocket to no longer be straight, so I needed to add more paper to the side of the pocket piece. I first traced the side line and then drew a straight line next to it before cutting off the excess paper, leaving some paper so that I can glue the pieces together. To create extra space in the front crotch, I will need to deepen the curve. To do this, I worked in a 1/4 or 6mm increments, since small adjustments here make a big difference. Off camera, I took in the excess fabric in the hips on my mock-up, and once I was happy with the fit, I copied what I changed on my mock-up to the pattern to create a smooth side seam. Then it was time to do a full seat adjustment to give more room for my booty. I added length to the back seat curve by cutting from the center back seam towards the hip. Then I glued extra pattern paper to my bottom back piece to add length and width through the seat. I pivoted the top pattern piece by 2 cm, and then I also scooped the seat curve by 1/4 inch or 6 mm. As I have now changed the back pattern piece, I placed the back pocket from my mock-up on top of my pattern to mark out the new markings for the back pocket. Then I decided to remove the extra 1.5 inch of the 1 inch seam allowance at the side seams, as I at this stage thought I wouldn't need it due to making my mock-ups. But as you will see later on, I will change my mind on this. Another common fit issue that I have when I'm making high-waisted trousers with a straight standard waistband is that I often have gaping in the back waist, as well as sometimes in the front of the waist as well. I decided to make a curved waistband and pinned in all the excess fabric, and then went on to create a curved waistband. If you want to learn how to make a curved waistband, I will have a more in-depth tutorial on how to pattern cut a curved waistband, as well as how to construct it, coming very soon. Once it's live, I will link to it both in the cards as well as in the description box down below. Let me know in a comment down below if you want a more in-depth tutorial on how to do any of the other adjustments that I'm making in this video. After all, I have all the footage, but I just didn't want to make this video too long and bore you. Then I cut out the fabric for my second mock-up, wearing my Sailor Moon costume because it was Halloween and I thought, why not? I cut out my mock-ups in thrifted sheets from the thrift store. And that's a really good, sustainable and frugal sewing tip for you. I tried to buy the low quality sheets from the thrift store, something of a lower thread count that I think people normally wouldn't want to sleep on if they could avoid it. At least I don't. On top of that, it's easier to sew in sheets with a low thread count rather than a high thread count. If you ever try to sew in high thread count Egyptian cotton sheets, you will know that it is not the easiest material to sew in. This is weekend free. I just finished filming a video, which is why I thought I could utilize the setup and just give you a little bit of an update. I really thought going into this project that I was gonna make them in a weekend, Why do I still, after over 20 years of sewing, still underestimate how long projects take? And this weekend I really hope to have more time to dedicate to sewing, because that's another thing also underestimated. It's how much time other tasks that I had planned for the weekend would take. So it's not really like I spent the past 2 weekends sewing. Of course I've done a little bit, but not as much as I would like to do. And hopefully this weekend I will have way more time so we can finally make these corduroy trousers. I will see you in the morning when I have constructed my mock-up, and hopefully it will fit. Now it's time to try on mock-up number 2, and I'm already so much happier with how the second mock-up fits. I have more room for my bum, the hips are smooth, and there is no excess fabric on the front pockets, and the curved waistband fits nice and snugly. But I still need to create a bit more room at the front crotch, and somehow I now have excess fabric at the back of the waist. Then I also removed a little bit too much at the side of the hips, which I realized I should have been careful to do as I was scooping the seat crotch for a full seat adjustment. I pinned the excess fabric at the back of the waist and marked the pin location, removed the waistband, cut off the excess and reattached the waistband. As you can see now, the trousers are already fitting me so much better. And now I will do the last adjustments before constructing the real deal. As it's only slight adjustments, I think I can do it without needing to do a third and final mock-up. I traced the cut-off pieces of fabric onto the back of the waist and then cut off the excess from the pattern piece as well. I also scooped the front crotch by another 1/4 or 6mm increment. And now it's time to finally make the real deal. I started by cutting out my pattern pieces. As I was cutting in corduroy, I made sure that the nap had the same direction for all my pattern pieces. I added back the extra 1.5 inch, which was removed from the side seams earlier, to avoid making too tight corduroy pants. All seam allowances of the lander pants are 1/2 inch, but the side seams have a 1 inch seam allowance to aid in the fitting process. When cutting out my pattern pieces, I made sure that I transferred all notches and other markings from the pattern pieces onto my fabric. I cut out 2 front pocket pieces in corduroy and another 2 to use as a lining in this green pattern quilting cotton. As my fabric had been folded since I pre-washed it, I made sure to remove any creases with my steamer. I used my steamer to avoid creating a flattened look on my corduroy. If you want my best tips on how to press and sew in corduroy, I have a video where I share all my corduroy sewing secrets, which I will link in the description box down below. I pinned the back dots and stitched them in place before gently pressing them. If you want to learn how to sew perfect darts every time, I have a video on that which I will link to down below. Then I prepared my back pockets by folding the top down by 1/4 inch and pressed. Then I took the pressed edge and folded it again at the 2 notches, pinned it in place and pressed again. As I'm pressing corduroy, I have a fluffy towel underneath my pocket and a fluffy towel on top to avoid creating a flattened look. But if you do sew your pants in another material, such as denim, you do not need to do this. Then I failed to follow the instructions as they described a different way of doing pockets than I'm used to. However, I made the pockets on my mock-up following the instructions, so I do not really know what happened to my brain here. I overlocked the edges with my serger and edge stitched the top of the fold in place. And I sewed along the side of the pocket at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. When I came to the bottom corner, I left the needle down and pivoted to sew along the bottom of the pocket until I reached the other corner where I was pivoting again before sewing up along the other side. Then I folded and pressed each of the 2 side edges and the bottom using the stitch line as my guide. Then I pinned the pockets to the back pant pieces and edge stitched around the sides and the bottom. Then it was time to construct the front pockets. I will start by cutting off about 1/16 of an inch of the curved edge, as well as these 2 straight edges of the pocket linings. This will help the pocket lining roll to the inside of the stitching together, making sure it is not visible later on the finished pants. I pinned the front pockets to the pocket linings along the curve and the 2 straight interior edges. As the pocket linings are now slightly smaller, they will pull slightly at this stage, so make sure that they are pinned correctly before you stitch these seams together. Then I stitched the front pocket and pocket linings together, leaving the top and outside edge unstitched. Then I trimmed the stitched seams to reduce bulk and clip the corners and along the curved edges. This will help the pockets turn well. After I turned the pockets to the right side, I pressed the pockets, making sure that the lining wasn't visible from the right side. Then I edge stitched along the curved edge of each front pocket. I pinned the pockets to each corresponding front piece, then I edge stitched around 2 straight edges. Then base stitched the top and side edges to the front pieces, and repeated the same steps for the other pocket. I serged the edges of the inner leg seam and then pinned the front pieces to the corresponding back pieces, right sides together, along the inner leg and stitched together. Once the pieces were stitched together, I pressed seam allowances open by finger pressing first, before I lightly pressed the seams using the steam setting on my iron. Then I overlocked the seam allowances of the right and left crotch separately before pinning the 2 pieces together along the crotch seam. I started sewing the crotch together at the center back and stitched until I reached the dot marking along the center front. Then it was time to prep the left and right front fly pieces. I finished the curved edge on the left fly with my serger, and then I prepped my right fly piece by folding it in half, right sides together, and stitching it together at the bottom angled edge. To prevent bulk, I clipped the corner and trimmed the seam allowance, and then I turned the right sides out and pressed, and finished the long edge with my serger. Right sides together, I pinned the straight edge of the left fly to the center front edge of the left front pant piece. During this step, I moved the right side front and back pant out of the way, and I stitched the fly together to the pant from the top down towards the dot. Then I trimmed the seam allowance to reduce bulk, which made the step of overlooking this edge earlier a little bit redundant, but whatever. I folded the left fly inwards and pinned in place. To mark where the buttons will go and where I will stitch to fasten the left fly, I placed the stitching guide for my size on the left fly. Then I marked along the outside edge where I will top stitch and transfer the markings for the buttonhole placements. Then I top stitched the fly in place following the marked line, and followed by making the buttonholes with my buttonhole presser foot. Then I turned my pants inside out and snipped the seam allowance on the right front crotch half an inch below the dot. And to prevent fraying, I used fray shake at the snip. I pinned the right fly to the right side, and to make sure that other parts of the pants were not in the way, I let the left side fall down. Then I stitched the right fly in place and flipped it to the inside of the pant. To secure the fly, I sewed a small bar tag through all the layers at the bottom of the curved stitching line, and another at an angle just below the first buttonhole. But I must admit that the last one made it really hard to get in and out of the pants, so instead later on I stitched the fly in place diagonally as I did on the Tatiana trousers, which I have a tutorial on how to sew the fly in if you're interested. Off camera I pressed the seam allowance on the crotch below the clip towards the left side of the pant, and then I top stitched along the crotch seam through all the layers from the right side, starting at the dot and ending at the top of the waistline. Then I lined up the side seams and pinned them in place. As mentioned earlier, I decided to follow the instructions and based at a 1-inch seam allowance. Then off camera I tried the pants on and I loved how they fit, and then trimmed the seam allowance down to 1/2 inch. Then I stitched at a normal stitch length. And then I finished the seam allowances with my serger and pressed the seam allowances towards the back. I have never made belt loops as they described in the instructions, so I thought I would give it a try. I folded and pinned the belt loop pattern piece right sides facing and then stitched it with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I trimmed away excess seam allowance to reduce bulk, and then I attached a big safety pin to one end to use to turn the piece. And I tried to turn my belt loops, but it was impossible without getting my safety pin stuck inside the belt loop piece. So I gave up and started to make my belt loops similar to what I did in my tutorial on how to make belt loops without any visible top stitching. But this time I am adding visible top stitching to my belt loops by edge stitching 1/8 of an inch along both sides. Then I measured and divided the belt loop piece into 5 pieces and cut. Then I used fray check at ends to prevent fraying. And then I pinned the belt loops to the waistline of the pants. Then I base stitched the belt loops to hold them in place. And then I discovered, despite my best efforts, that my waistline was too wide. So I had to take it in further to fit my waist as well as my waistband better. To make sure that I didn't keep on making more mistakes, I base stitched what I wanted to take in at the side seams first and then try the trousers on. As I was happy with the fit, I then stitched with a normal stitch length and cut off the excess fabric and serged the top of the side seam again. Then it was time to start to construct the curved waistband. As I now have 2 pattern pieces instead of 1, I started by stitching these 2 pieces together at the top. If you want more details on what I did to construct my curved waistband, my curved waistband pattern tutorial will come soon, and once it's live I will link it down in the description box down below. To make sure that I have a neat edge on the waistband on the inside of the pants, I stitched 1/2 inch away from the inner edge, and then pressed the inner edge of the waistband up. I pinned the outer edge of the waistband to the trousers, right sides facing, and made sure that each end of the waistband was extending 1/2 inch past the center front, and then I stitched the waistband in place. Then I pinned the sides of the waistbands together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and stitched. To reduce bulk, I trimmed the seam allowance and then I turned the waistband to the right side. Then I stitched in the ditch in the seam between the pants and the waistband and made sure that I catch the folded edge of the waistband inside the pants. Then the instructions said to top stitch around the edges of the waistband. But as I made my trousers in corduroy, I decided to skip this step. However, if I make the Lander pants in denim in the future, I will definitely top stitch all around the waistband. Then to fasten my belt loops, I stitched back and forth a few times on each belt loop around 1/4 inch below the waistband seam. Then I pressed the belt loops upwards and then I folded the top under about 1/2 inch and pinned the belt loops in place so that they were aligned with the top of the waistband. I then stitched back and forth a few times around 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the waistband to secure. Then it was time to make the buttonhole on the waistband. And once that was done, I opened all the buttonholes with my seam ripper. I then pinned the right fly and waist in place to mark my button placements correctly. To do this, I pinned in the middle of the buttonhole and then I marked the pin location with tailor's chalk and removed the pin. As I was going to apply denim buttons to my trousers, I made holes using double-pointed knitting needles. First, I used a thinner double-pointed needle, followed by a thicker double-pointed needle. Then I pulled the tack inside a hole and pushed the denim button on top before hammering the button in place. If you want a more in-depth video on how to insert jean buttons, I do have a tutorial on that here on my channel. Then I folded the bottom raw edge of the pants up by around 1/4 inch and pressed, and then folded up by another 3 inches and pinned and pressed. I finished the trousers by top stitching the fold in place to 7/8 of an inch from the edge of the pants. Oh my god, I love how these trousers turned out. The project took way longer than I expected. Why do I never learn? I do not know. But let's check out how the trousers look when I'm wearing them.
Take it away, feeling too good to me. Chilling all day, all in your space is where I wanna be. Here in this room, what did you do? I just can't get enough. Too caught up in your love. I've been trying to forget, but you won't let me. Something in my brain wrong.
If you're interested in making a path for yourself, I will link to the True Bias Lander pants in the description box down below. If you like this video, you most likely will like these videos over here as well. And until next time, bye!
You always